I was a music major in college because I was a classical music person. I played the French horn. I have I my father worked in the record industry, so I grew up with all these vinyl records all the time. And he loved both. He was early rock, he was a boomer, but also, loved he loved all of Mozart. It was more Mozart than Beethoven. But I so I have an eclectic music taste. I also, growing up in the 80s, I'd literally go from Led Zeppelin to Public Enemy, right? Which is what a
Yeah.
lot of my friends did, right? We were the transition, and that was what we thought was cool. I certainly had a Clash phase, so just like sort of any kid of the 80s. I bring this up because I'm a new music snob. I miss the days in the early 90s. You'd go to listening stations, and I was
Yeah.
the guy. If I found one song on an album I liked, I bought the whole album. I'm like, I'm giving that artist a chance because I believed in the entire idea of, hey, they have something to say. Let me listen to the whole thing. And my frustration with music today, I have I and I'm will confess I have the luxury to do this, but I have 6 different music streaming services that I
Wow.
use because I had it all on Apple, and it can't.
Mhm.
I never get anything that's new on classical. Meaning, and obviously classical music's never new, but there's new interpretations, new recordings, whatever, because it's not a big enough part of my library to trigger the algorithm, right?
Mhm.
Or I have way too much 70s and 80s rock, and I just get all the new music is always something on that. So I've literally created, all right, this is my classical music one, this is my hip hop one, this is my classic rock, etc. And so I look at it and I think it's the algorithms that have really screwed up the ability to surface new music. That's what
Mhm.
I have experienced. Am I describing something that's familiar to you?
Absolutely. One of the most sort of shocking statistics about music these days is that 75% of music that's streamed every year is old music, music that's older than 18 months old. So only 25% of what's being
Mhm.
streamed at any given moment is new. And those numbers keep getting quote unquote worse every year. The piece of the pie that's new is getting smaller and smaller. And a lot of this, I think, does come from the forces of algorithms, where
Yeah.
they the easiest way to predict what someone's going to want to listen to tomorrow is to study what they listened to yesterday. And this
Mhm.
has been marketing logic for time eternal. You can think back to the stereotype of a record label boss in the 70s telling a rock band to make a new hit that sounds like their last hit, right? Like these pressures and these forces are kind of the table stakes for making art and capitalism, you could say. But algorithmic culture gives us so much. Algorithms give us so much data, and are so sophisticated about serving you something that is going to keep you maybe not actively engaged, but
Right.
passively engaged. Not
Yeah.
not you're not going to write down the name of the artist necessarily, but you're not going to hit skip.
Right.
And so this encourages a blander, more passive, and more recycled or regressive culture.
No, it does. Another way that I've always thought, TV ads, and obviously few and few people see TV ads, but you can always tell who, what demographic they're targeting by the music that they licensed in the background. Because it's always,
Mm,
to me, they're always targeting somebody who listened to that music when they were a teenager. Right. So, it's like you meeting, so you could always sort of see, oh, they're targeting, boomers. That's why they're using the Beatles, or they're
mm,
targeting, Gen X. That's why they're using Guns N' Roses, or they're targeting, you know, uh, millennials. That's why you're hearing some Nirvana. I don't know if
yeah.
Nirvana's millennial or not. I like we can debate that, but you get my point here, right? Like you see it sometimes in that, and that's now how I feel these algorithms are working, almost in the same way that car companies use music to try to get us to trigger nostalgia to get to make purchases.
Well, that's certainly true, and that's certainly how it's been done for a long time. I mean, the interesting thing about what you're saying is, what kind of music would you play now to make someone who's young now nostalgic for their teenagehood? If you think about what's popular these days, you can think about artists like Sabrina Carpenter, Benson Boone. There's a lot of music on the charts that, uh, to me, isn't sonically linked that closely to this moment. It sounds like a rehash of classic rock or old country
Hmm.
music. It's a kind of pastiche of really all the decades of rock and roll that you just referenced. Is kind of coming back and it's being
Right.
remixed, and that's kind of how music has always moved forward. But it hasn't always felt this much like this regressive, really. And I think there are market forces related to these algorithms that are encouraging pop producers and songwriters to think about how they can
Mm.
make music that is going to play to a very large audience by triggering nostalgia for multiple generations. And what the effect of that is to create pop music that doesn't really move the ball forward that much in terms of sound.
Right. The other thing though, and let me do a counter on this and what algorithms taught us that perhaps we didn't fully appreciate. So before the algorithm, I would argue the coasts dictated music taste, right? It
Mm.
was either New York or LA. And, yes, we could throw in Motown there too, but really those were the three places. And um, it turns out country music was a lot more popular
Hmm.
than how, this is a class, it's sort of like it was it's a version of this of Letterman versus Leno. Leno was always more popular in the middle of America. Letterman was more popular on the coast, and the ratings showed it, right? Leno had more viewers. Leno had more eyeballs. Even if Letterman was winning the college educated crowd, if you want to go there.
Hmm.
And so what the flattening of music taste did is it reminded people, oh, did you know a majority of Americans actually prefer country? Because it does
Yes.
feel as if country's moment now, where it's the only place I can find the electric guitar anymore, country.
Hmm.
The only place you find some of the most interesting song lyrics that have a message, country. Um, is that an argument for crowds that maybe we were mistreating country music in our culture for decades?
Yeah, well, part of the story that we're talking about here is the fall of gatekeepers.
Hmm.
Radio DJs, print magazines, major labels. You're right, they all had a kind of coastal, often elite bias. And so, as more and more of America has gone online, or not gone online, but gone on to streaming in the past decade or
Hmm.
so, you're absolutely seeing things like country, also hip hop, revealed the kind of latent popularity that was perhaps already there. Um, and yeah, it's a fascinating thing because it's not only happening in America, but it's also allowing global sounds to come to the fore and be exposed to American audiences, where things like K-pop or Spanish language pop or Afropop, Afrobeats, uh, these are also like kind of like in a renaissance of popularity. And the question is, were they kind of always this popular and we couldn't really
Yeah.
see that in America, or did this falling of the gatekeepers, this algorithmic culture, this ability to search and listen to whatever you want on demand, did that create a new marketplace and expose? Is that really the source of novelty for people who are looking for novelty in culture now? Audiences are gravitating toward these sounds they really couldn't have accessed as easily a few years ago.
Look, I'm glad you brought up Latin pop or Latin dance, if you will, or however you want to, and K-pop, because both of those, you're right. I mean, that was something that Details magazine was never going to talk about,
Totally
right?
right.
You know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I came
uh,
home,
yeah,
to visit my baby boomer parents a couple years ago, and they'd been listening to, their Alexa algorithms, and they'd become obsessed with Bad Bunny. They don't speak any Spanish. They never listened to any Latin pop ever before, and
yeah.
suddenly their tastes seem to have expanded thanks to algorithms. So these things aren't all bad.
No, that's why I wanted to sort of like basically fight my own argument here a little bit. My son is 18 and thinks Oasis is amazing.
Yeah, we have
Is
this
having
real.
this huge 90s obsession, and he loves Oasis. And you're like, okay, interesting. I said, well, you might like the Beatles. Oasis was kind of a Beatles ripoff, type of thing.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah. Which
so I don't know what to make of that. I mean, look, I remember myself, about his age. I was, if I was going into older music, for me, I got real into Motown, when I was 17,
mm,
18. As I started getting into hip hop, right? Then it was like, oh, I want to hear more black music, so I got
yeah, yeah,
really
yeah.
into Motown recordings back then. So I guess that's the same mindset. Um, but then
Right,
I
like
look
being
at
a
Taylor,
music fan.
yeah.
Being
What's
a
that?
music fan is part of learning your history is part of that. And so I do think that some of this like fear of stagnation that we're seeing is actually identifying um, really people who are excited about music and are learning
Mhm.
about it and treating that as if it's something perverse about it, which is
Now,
actually it's rather healthy.